Okay,
Okay.
fine.
We'll just wait a few minutes, Miss Ur.
Yes, that's fine. You tell me when you'd like me to start.
Of course, of course. I'll just
Good
like to do
morning.
it and then we'll start.
Good morning.
Okay, Miss Ur, I think we can begin.
That's fine.
Dear all, thank you for joining our ELT 19 event and welcome to our middle school session titled Learning Agency, Encouraging Learner Choice and Autonomy. If you have any questions during the session, please feel free to write them in the Q&A section. If we have time at the end of the session, we will aim to answer as many as possible. I am honored to introduce Miss Penny Ur, OBE. Miss Ur has had 30-year experience as an English teacher in primary, secondary, and tertiary education and has taught courses for teachers at bachelor and master's level at Özel Academic College of Education and Haifa University. She has also lectured extensively at language teachers conferences worldwide. She is interested in all aspects of language teaching methodology, but is particularly interested in issues of vocabulary and grammar in language teaching, English as an international language, and places of research as a source of professional knowledge. For 10 years, she was the editor of Cambridge Handbooks for Language Teachers series. In 2013, she was awarded the OBE, Officer of the British Empire, by Her Majesty the Queen for services to English language teaching. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Penny Ur, courtesy of Cambridge University Press.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Jessica.
You're very welcome.
I'm really, really happy to be back in Turkey. I've been to Turkey several times in my career and always enjoy talking to Turkish teachers. So it's really a pleasure and a privilege to be here representing Cambridge University Press and Assessment. Okay, so my topic is learner agency with a focus on middle school. I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it okay. Can you see it? Yes?
You can, Miss Ur.
Okay, great. So talking about learner agency, and let's start off with a definition. So learner agency, as the title says, title gave a rough definition of it. Here's a rather more complete and academic one. Learner agency refers to the feeling of ownership and sense of control that students have over their learning, and so on. You can read the rest of it for yourselves. But the main thing is giving students a feeling that they are, to some extent, in control of what they're learning and how they're learning, and thus increase their well-being, which is the theme of this conference. Various interpretations of the concept. The one which I found when I was preparing this session and looked at the research focuses on learners inviting to find things out for themselves rather than asking the teacher. So, for example, inductive grammar teaching, right? You give students lots of exemplars of a particular grammatical feature and ask them to work out for themselves what the rule is. Another example is something called DDL, data-driven learning, where learners are invited to consult a corpus to check out frequency of a particular word or combination of words. Another one suggested in the same website that I just mentioned earlier, learners check out interesting language phenomena. So they come across an odd expression by a native speaker and want to know why this is so, and they are invited to try and find out themselves rather than asking the teacher. And finally, looking up in a dictionary or grammar rather than being told by the teacher. Now, these are the kinds of things which I found in my own reading, and I have some reservations about them as a basis for learner agency, particularly for middle school learners. The question is whether the learners are given a choice. You say, the teacher says to the students, okay, here's an odd language feature, go to the internet and see if you can find out why, or go to the corpora and see if you can find out why. And the question is, are they given a choice? Are they asked, do you want me to tell you, the teacher, or do you want to find out for yourselves? And I think it's quite important, this element of choice, for the sense of agency by the teachers, by these students, sorry. If your students were told, do you want me to tell you what the answer is, or do you want to go and find it out for yourselves? I think a lot of them, particularly at middle school level, a lot of them would say, I'd rather the teacher told me. I rely on the teacher to give me the right answer, and I'm not sure I can find it out for myself. So I'm not sure whether not giving the students a choice is actually detracting from learner agency rather than the opposite. And then there's the issue of time. If the students have to go to the internet to find out the answer to a grammatical question, how long is this going to take them? As opposed to how long would it take me, the teacher, to explain it in class? And this is quite a crucial issue because we have limited time to get through a lot of material, and asking students to find out things for themselves takes a lot longer. So that's another thing to be taken into account, and which leads me to some reservations about this idea of tell the students to find out by themselves. So we come on to interpretation 2 of the concept, which is my interpretation, which is learners are empowered to take decisions, not all decisions, but some decisions at least, about their own learning, so that they feel that they are in touch, in control. They are partners in the learning process, not just passive recipients. And this, of course, raises the question, if learners decide what to learn, then what's the function of the teacher? And we need to ask and think about this question. And it's a question of balance and professional judgment. Which decisions in language learning should be taken by the teacher, and which should be taken by the learner in order to ensure, yes, learner agency, but also optimal learning? And in the example I gave before, I'm not sure whether telling a student to go to a corpus to try and find out what the right collocation is necessarily ensuring optimal learning. And so have a look at these. Should learners be empowered to decide these 10 questions? Just have a look at it for the moment, and let's pause for a second and write your response to any of those questions. Should learners be empowered to decide? 1, 2, any, none of the items on your screen. Should learners be empowered to decide what is in the syllabus? Should they be empowered to decide, David says, lesson plans? Should they plan the lessons? How should they plan how they are assessed? 7, should they plan decide which task to do? Yes, interesting that you're going for the later ones, 8 to 10, 8 to 9, the later ones rather than the earlier ones, and I totally agree with you. Yes, what kind of responses I give. Number 10, yes, I think this is fairly clearly one of the decisions we'd like to leave to the students as far as possible. Yes, thank you. Your responses are really in tune with my own, so we can go forward with a sense of empathy, sympathy. Let's look at, I'm going to, later on in this session, towards the end of the session, I'll sum up and I'll say what I feel about each of these. But at the moment, I want to go into particular practical aspects of teaching which implement some or all of these items. Let's look, first of all, providing for learner agency one. This is where I think we can give our students a sense of agency by giving them a sense that they are respected, that their opinions are respected, and that we consult them, even if we don't necessarily adopt what they tell us to do. But at least we consult. I think the first item is at the beginning of the course. It is important, I feel, to share with the students all these items that you see on your screen. I'm sharing with students, look, I'm going to be teaching you this term, this year. This is what I want us to achieve. This is what the course book is, and this is what its components are. Let's get familiar with it, and this is how I intend to use it. This is the homework I intend to give, and I'm also going to tell you how I'm going to assess you at the end of the course. So I am sharing with the students my own plans and goals so that they know where I am and they feel that I respect them enough to share with them. And then at a micro level, even if it's not just the whole course and how they're going to be assessed, but a micro level when you're teaching a lesson, I think it's really useful to share with the students, this is what we're going to do in the lesson. Not just do it top down, I'm going to do this and I'm not going to tell you what's coming next, but I'll just do it. But yes, at the beginning, even write it on the board as implied in the illustration here, what I'm going to do in the lesson, and keep you up to date, up to speed with what I'm doing and what I'm planning. Here's my plan for this lesson. This is why we're doing this activity. And this is why I'm giving you my homework. So you know where I am and I'm sharing with you, and you feel that I respect you. Moving from respect, sharing my own goals and aims, to consultation, actually asking the students, what do you feel? What would you decide? If it was up to you, what would you like? And it's important for me to know what the students prefer, but it's also important for them to feel that they are being consulted and that their opinion matters. We're back to agency again. So, for example, at the beginning of the course, a brief discussion in mother tongue. What do you want from this course? What are you expecting? What do you expect? What do you particularly dislike doing in English lessons? If I want to know things that don't work from them. And I also want to know what they feel helps them learn better. And I also want to carry on and ask them in the middle of the course. It's no use asking, well, it is useful to get feedback at the end of the course. Of course it is, but it's much more useful to get feedback at the middle of the course when you can still do something about it. If you get it at the end of the course and you're leaving them at the end of the year, you can't benefit by their suggestions. If you have take time out at the beginning of at the middle of the course to ask them, then it can be really helpful in your continuing teaching. So in the middle of the course, I might take time out and ask them, so far, guys, what has helped you learn in this course? I'm not asking them, how am I as a teacher? That's not a very useful thing to ask, and it could be embarrassing. But think about yourselves, your own learning. What has helped you so far in my course? What helps you learn particularly? What hasn't helped you? Do you have any particular suggestions for what should be going on in the courses, what I can control that will help you learn better? And finally, so that they take responsibility for themselves as well, think about what you, the learner, can do more or better. So I'm consulting them, asking them what helps you learn and what do you think you, as a responsible learner, can do to make things better. And again, this is consultation as a component of learner agency. Moving on then, I've talked about consultation and respect. I'm now moving on to look at, during the lesson, how can we, while we are interacting with the students in the lesson, what can we do to increase their feeling of that we respect them, that they have some control over their learning and that they are learning better? What can we do? And I'm going to look at questioning sessions here. The most common form of questioning in the classroom is the conventional ping pong, or what's called in the literature IRF, initiation, response, feedback. Initiation, the teacher initiates, asks a question. Response, the students raise their hands to answer and one of the students answers. So initiation, response, and then the teacher gives feedback. So that's IRF, or ping pong. It's a very, very common form of student-teacher interaction in the class, and it's probably the most common there is from Socrates onwards, and in any subject, not just English teaching. So the teacher gives feedback, and they go on to the next question. But the problem with this interaction is that it's scores very low on learner agency. Think about it for a moment. The teacher is the one who decides which questions to ask. The teacher is the one who decides in what order they shall be done. The teacher decides on the timing. Students can't collaborate, they can't help each other. And the teacher assesses the answers. It's all teacher doing it, and the students have no say at all, and there is no student initiative or cooperation, collaboration here. Let's look and see what can be done with this conventional interaction to increase learner agency. Students have no say in any of these. They're just sitting there passively, most of them. Another possibility, introducing flexibility, is the following. The teacher has a set of questions, a grammar exercise or a vocabulary exercise or a comprehension exercise, and says to the students, look through the questions for a minute or two. You don't have to answer them all. Look for the ones you know the answers to. And then, yes, I want you to raise your hands. Raise your hands and tell me the answer, but you choose which question you're going to answer, and you're going to choose one which you're fairly sure you know the answer to. And the teacher gives feedback as before. Yes, no, correct, incorrect. Stage 2 goes a little further than this. The student, sorry, I'm still with, let me backtrack for a second. The interaction pattern I've just shown you, I want to analyze it for a second. The students decide, in this case, what questions to answer. The students decide on the order. The students decide how much time they need. And students work on their own, as they did in the earlier one, and also the teacher assesses answers, as she did in the earlier one. But let's move on now to interaction pattern 3, which adds flexibility. And in this case, it works like this. The teacher tells the students they may work on their own or with a classmate. Okay, this is new. Not you have to work with a partner or you have to work on your own. You choose whether you want to work on your own with a classmate. They are not expected to know all the answers, and I tell them that you may not know all the answers. You go for the ones you know, as before. Look through the questions. Note answers together with your partner or alone. to the ones they think they can answer correctly. And when I, the teacher, see that they've probably done as much as they can, I display the answers on the board rather than doing the ping pong. What's the answer to this? What's the answer to this? The students self-checked, and then they consult the teacher about any they got wrong or didn't know. Analyzing this interaction pattern, what we see is the students decide which questions to answer. They decide on the order. They decide how much time they need, and they take the time they need. They choose whether they prefer to work on their own or with a partner. And it's a question of learning style. It's not a question of right or wrong here. Some students simply prefer to work on their own or prefer to work collaboratively. And then students self-assess, but consult the teacher if necessary. So we've got 3 interaction patterns I've described here. And I want to just summarize this part in a sort of list here. The conventional on the left-hand side and promoting learner agency on the right-hand side. So let's contrast. In the conventional ping pong, the teacher determines how much time for each item. In learner agency oriented interaction, we try to give students the time they need. Some will take longer, some will take shorter. We need to give them the time they need. In the conventional ping pong, the teacher decides the order in which the questions are done. In the adaptation, I was suggesting the students can go for later questions if those are the ones they want to answer. They don't have to do it in exactly 1, 2, 3, 4, according to what the teacher says. It is implied normally both in textbook exercises and by teachers that you should know all the answers. And it's really helpful if we say to them, you don't have to know all the answers, do as much as you can, it's up to you. The responsibility is moving to the students, and the same thing with the next item, all the exercise or as much as you can. And then there is the question of individual or pair, allowing students the right to decide whether they work on their own or they work with a partner is also a very useful and helpful way to increase a feeling of student comfort, well-being, and agency. Finally, normally the teacher checks answers to the questions, but what I'm suggesting here is that there is a place for self-checking, consulting the teacher where necessary, but not with it all being top-down checked by the teacher. I'll pause for a second if anyone wants to write in the chat box any response to this idea of how to run a question-answer session in the classroom, whether it makes sense to you, whether you'd like to add anything, and then we'll move on to talking about using the textbook. Okay. Yes. David says, what about if a student asked a question, very likely to have an idea about it? Students can put teacher can put students in small groups to answer the question. Yes, right. That's another variation, and it's also empowering for the students. If the question comes from the student, of course, that's really a good way of encouraging learner agency, that not everything has to come from the teacher, but the student can ask the question and then work on it in small groups. Right, if you have more comments, please feel free to write, even though I'm moving on now to the next topic. I'll keep an eye on the chat box and answer as I can. And if you have questions for the end of the session, please write them in the question and answer box. Okay, textbook exercises. Normally, textbook exercises are closed-ended. Closed-ended means there's one right answer to each question. As soon as there's one right answer to each question, there's no flexibility open for the students, like the examples you can see here on the screen. One right answer. And there is no possibility for students to change anything. It's writ in stone, as it were. The textbook decides what the questions shall be, what the right answer shall be. Can't move left or right to change anything. I'm going to suggest how we can change that in a moment. The textbook, as I said, decides right or wrong. Let's have a look at an example. Okay, she left. It has to be left, right? The right answer. Number 2, the right answer has to be he made the cake. Number 3, they sat there for 6 hours. And number 4, the man read the book. I mean, there's lots of things wrong with this particular type of exercise. For example, you don't really need to read the whole sentence at all. You don't need to understand anything. All you need to do is know what the past form of the verb in parentheses is and write it in. So there's all sorts of things wrong with it. But what I'm worried about here is that it's very, very top down and it's rigid and it's not allowing students possibility of changing things. And I'm suggesting that the teacher, it is the teacher who is using the textbook. The textbook should not be a master, it should be a servant. We should be able to adapt it as we need to in order to not only to increase learner agency, but also to increase learning, to increase interest, to increase the possibility of responding at different levels. So let's look at how we can achieve some of these aims by changing things slightly in the textbook. Supposing, for example, we do this. We say, okay, the answer to the first one is left. The answer to the second one is made, sat, and read. But I'm going to delete the end of the sentence. And I'm going to invite you to end the sentence any way you like. So, for example, she left. How could you end that sentence? What would the whole sentence be? Could be she left early. Could also be she left late. Any ideas? Would anyone like to write something in there? Or other possibilities for the sentence beginning she left? She left suddenly. She left before noon. She left her home. Thank you very much. She left without saying goodbye. Great, she left quickly. Now, if you look at those, firstly, they're much more interesting than the original one. Secondly, yes, great. I'm not going to read them out, but have a look. There's some lovely answers here. They can answer at different levels. So you've got she left quickly, which is fairly easy, but you've also got she left without saying goodbye, which is a fairly high level for a middle school student, fairly high level response. So they're answering at different levels. It's much, much more interesting if they, as I would insist, I'm not asking you to do this in the chat box, but in class, I would insist on them saying the whole sentence. So she left without saying goodbye. She left to go to another city. She left the keys. She left quickly. She left the hall. I would ask them to say the whole sentence so that they get lots and lots of practice in left in meaningful contexts. Now, this has all sorts of advantages. As I said before, it's more interesting, more motivating. It affords answers at different levels. It gives them a lot more practice in the target item left. But it also, which is relevant to the topic of this talk today, it also gives them a sense of control, a sense of power, a sense of initiative, a sense of agency. I can decide what the sentence is going to be. I'm not told exactly what to write by the textbook. Let's look at some other possibilities using the same item, the same exercise. Supposing you say, okay, you don't have to use the verb in parentheses. You can delete it or ignore it. what could be, let's take number 2 this time. Instead of he made the cake, can you suggest other possibilities there? He burned the cake, yes. He ruined the cake, he ate the cake, he chose the cake. Yes, great. He bought the cake, and so on. So lots and lots of answers there. And what we're getting here again is lots and lots of practice, much more interesting, and the students in control, making their own sentences with a sense of agency. Didn't make the cake. Okay. And my final suggestion is to personalize. So instead of the subject provided top down by the textbook, I say make the sentences true for you. In this case, I can just substitute I for the subject, but I could do it in other ways. But I could just say the sentence again, but make any changes to make it true for you. Write a true statement about yourself. Okay, do you want to try this? Any of these? Okay, 1, 2, 3, or 4. A true statement about yourself, but it has to be in the past tense because we are practicing the past tense here. So, any volunteers here? I read a very interesting book yesterday. I sat by the window. Isla, thank you. I sat for an exam yesterday. Wow. How was it, David? Did you pass it? I left him on a rainy day. Yes, I read a comic book last night. I read a lot. Lovely. Okay, so this is true for them. And again, it's putting the learner at the center. It's giving them a sense of, I'm in control here. I'm saying my own thing, but I'm also getting effective practice in the target items. Thank you very much. Great. And the principle here is enabling learner choice by opening the question to multiple answers chosen or created by the learners. And the way we can do this, we take a textbook exercise and we simply delete or ignore whatever it is which makes the sentence rigid. So supposing we have an option in parentheses, so we delete the parentheses, as we did in the first example there. Or we delete or ignore the word bank. Put in your own words, you don't have to use words from word bank. Or delete or ignore the multiple choice options. Just use the root of the multiple choice and add your own options, whatever you want. Delete or ignore one of the columns of a matching exercise and choose your own matches. Or the personalization option, invite students to change so that the sentence relates to themselves. So all these possibilities are coming on now to self-assessment, but just to sum up again with the textbook, I have to say that I'm a great supporter of textbooks. I think textbooks are really important as a basis for a course. And I don't think, just getting ahead of myself a little bit, I don't think the students should choose the textbook. I think the teacher or the institution should choose the textbook. But having chosen the textbook, there are ways of using it to improve the involvement and agency of learners and to get them to enjoy, in fact, and get more learning from the exercises there. So let's move on to assessment, learner agency in assessment procedures. Self-assessment, but I think we need to make a distinction here between summative assessment and formative assessment. Summative assessment is whatever the final assessment is to get a grade, usually an exam at the end of the course, which gives you your final grade for the course, and there's no more teaching after it. And I think that is essentially the responsibility of the teacher or institution. I would not ask my students to give themselves a final assessment. Formative assessment, however, is a different kettle of fish completely. Formative assessment is done in order to provide information about progress or achievement during the course. So this is the amount you know so far. This is what you've achieved during the last week, the last 2 weeks, the last month, the last term. And we're carrying on later, but this gives you an idea, it gives me an idea of where you are at the moment, in order to progress further. And for this, I think responsibility should be shared between teacher and students. So one way of doing this is asking the students to write the tests. Not completely, but in collaboration with the teacher. So it works like this. I give students the material that they're going to be tested on, if it's a list of words or a list of vocabulary structures or whatever. And I invite them to write test items. I take them in, I check, make sure there's no mistakes, and then I write the test. I write the test myself. I don't ask them to write the test. I write the test myself, but I use the items they have composed. Not solely, I might introduce items also which I've composed, but at least some of them I use the items which they themselves have composed. And this has various advantages. First of all, actually writing the test items on their own is a review of the material for which the test is planned. It lowers test anxiety quite a lot. So they're going to do a test, but they know at least some of the items that are going to be there, and it makes it much less scary. It gives them a sense of ownership of the text, not something that's being imposed from above, but it's partly something which I myself have, as a learner, have helped to compose, and it increases a sense of agency. Ongoing class quizzes, there is some justification for asking students to self-check. If it is not a grade which is going to go into their records and be part of the summative assessment, then there's no real temptation to cheat. They need to know how well they're doing. And so it makes sense to provide a key to answers and just tell them to check themselves, as I suggested in an earlier section. And the goal then is for them, and it should be made explicit, for you, the students, to check how you're doing, to find out what you know and what you don't know, and what you need to work on from now on. So it's checking yourself, self-assessment for formative assessment. A very useful tool, which some of you may know, is the yes/no quiz. I use this for teaching vocabulary, giving them a sheet with lots of 20 or 30 items of vocabulary on it, and ask them to annotate with yes or no, or tick or cross by each. Yes means yes, I know this. No means no, I don't know this. And the ones they don't know, they can ask the teacher or ask each other, share with each other to try and find out. And it's a very good way of very quickly checking how much they know, how much they don't know of a certain set of vocabulary. This can be made slightly more elaborate and exact by giving 4 responses instead of 2. So a double check means I know this and I could use it in my own speaking or writing. A tick means I understand this receptively. Question means I'm not quite sure if I know this or not. It looks familiar, I'm not sure what it means. And a cross, I definitely don't this. I need to learn it again. Okay, let's go on now. I've made some suggestions as to how to increase learner agency in ongoing procedures in the classroom. I'm going to go back now, as I said I would, and look at the original list I gave you at the beginning of this session and say what my opinion is, and invite you please to respond as I'm going in the chat box if you wish, and to relate to things I've been doing during the rest of this talk. Questions 1, 2, and 3 related to the following. Should learner agency include decisions regarding syllabus, materials, methodology. Should students decide the syllabus? Should they choose materials? Should they decide methodology? And my own view on this is no, basically. I think these are the areas where the teacher or the institution needs to make decisions. The only slight why it isn't right at the end of the thing is because methodology, I think there is place for the teacher to ask the students, and I suggested this earlier on in the talk, to actually do some, at least some questionnaires or asking the students, how do you like to be taught? So there is a room here for a little bit of flexibility. For instance, if students say we really don't like working collaboratively, or we don't like doing things on our own in the class, we prefer to be guided by the teacher. I think this is something which the teacher needs to take into account. So it's a question of judiciously listening to the students and deciding what I'm going to take into account, what I'm not. Bottom line, the teacher is really the expert, and I think has the right to take the decision on these things, but keeping an ear open to what the students like. And as I said, also, the students should be provided with information. I mentioned this as an aspect of respect for the student, to provide them with the information and their views taken into account where appropriate. Denise says, could you give some tips for speaking exercises, please? It's not part of this talk, Denise, but I will be, at the end of this session, I will be giving my email, so please write to me and I'll see if I can help you by email. Questions 5 and 6. Should learner agency include empowering students to self-assess and design tests? And my answer here would be sort of yes and no. Formative, I said earlier. Summative assessment, no. Formative assessment, probably yes. And I gave details earlier. That's why I'm putting the cross in the middle there. For formative assessment, often useful, as I illustrated earlier, to contribute to test design and or assess their own results. Questions 7, 8 had to do with decisions on which task to do and how much of it. And here I'm moving much further towards the yes. I think as far as possible, where appropriate, students should be allowed choice as to which task to do and how much of it. And I suggested some ways of affording these kinds of flexibility. Finally, should learner agency include the choice of which order to answer questions and the possibility of giving different answers? And here I'm fairly strongly yes. I think, and I've given examples of how this can be done. And I would say as often as possible, which may involve adapting the textbook task to enable a variety of responses. Okay, here are the references, which and I hope you'll have the PowerPoint available to you so you can look at them if you like. And thank you for your attention and participation. And I think I've left a few minutes for questions or comments. So over to you, Jessica, to run the question and answer.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ur. Could everybody please write their questions in the chat box and we can share them with Ms. Ur? We'll give you a minute or so to do that.
Okay, if you want to write down my email, if you wish to write to me, I'm closing the share screen in a second and then we can.
We've got one question, Ms. Ur, from,
okay.
Yes, how much of learner agency may a course book offer? Are there improvements of the activities or tasks aiming learner agency? So that's from Songül.
Yes, I think textbooks are more and more taking into account the need for giving students choices and the right to decide how they do things and what they do and what they don't do. But still, I think there is a place for teacher adaptation in the ways that I showed earlier in the course. So if you like, textbooks are the sort of framework, they're an important framework. As I said earlier, I'm very much in favor of using textbook as a basis for a course, but using it flexibly and affording learner choice where possible. Yes.
Wonderful. I think everything was crystal clear, Ms. Ur. So we haven't got any other questions. All right.
There was a question in the question box, which is in Turkish, so I don't understand it.
I think I missed that question, Ms. Ur.
In the Q&A.
In the Q&A part.
The question is asking if we need to fill in a form for the raffle, Jessica. I think.
Okay.
Do you know?
Oh, okay.
Not for me.
Do you know the answer to that question? I'm not sure.
No, we don't have to fill in a
No,
form.
okay.
Yes, it's all already pre-done. Okay, then. All right. Thank you very much. Ms. Ur, I just would like to present you with something. Just a little thank you from us. Oh, sorry. Okay. So yes, we wanted to thank you for these sessions. On behalf of İzmir Özel Türk Koleji, I'd like to present you with this certificate. We hope that it will serve as a memento of the event, and of course, we'll also email it to you. Please feel free to visit the sponsors' virtual stands, which you can find under the sessions before the raffle, which will start at 11:45. There's just some instructions on the screen if you'd like to have a look. To access the raffle, select sessions, scroll down to raffle and closing speeches and select join. So thank you once again, Ms. Penny Ur, OBE and Cambridge University Press, and for all for joining this session. Please enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.